The mainstream media is currently obsessing over President Donald Trump throwing a massive tariff hammer at Canada. You are hearing non-stop broadcasts about automobiles, aluminum, and steel. The talking heads on networks like CNN and Fox are telling you that the United States is dominating Ottawa in a masterclass of economic protectionism. They are deliberately ignoring a terrifying reality buried thousands of feet under the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. Canada does not need to tax American cars to retaliate and win this escalating trade war. They hold the ultimate kill switch to the entire American agricultural system. It is not about crude oil. It is not about silicon microchips. It is not about advanced military weapons. The singular resource dictating the daily survival of 330 million Americans is potash. Potash is the irreplaceable fertilizer input that American farmland absolutely requires to generate commercial-scale crops. The United States currently imports 93% of the potash it consumes every single year. Canada specifically controls exactly 85% of that entire vital supply pipeline. Right now, President Donald Trump has aggressively activated sweeping tariffs to force Canada into total economic submission. In doing so, he has accidentally handed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau the absolute ultimate geopolitical leverage. The Canadian government only has to restrict or delay potash exports, and the American domestic food supply chain immediately breaks down. The weaponization of trade was supposed to rigidly protect American interests. Instead, it has put a loaded gun directly to the head of every single farmer in states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Ohio. A quiet shutdown of Canadian mining exports means the devastating agricultural crisis of 2026 is already permanently locked in. At exactly 8:15 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, the geopolitical tectonic plates beneath North America violently shifted. President Donald Trump, operating directly from the Oval Office, authorized a sweeping and immediate tariff regime targeting goods crossing the northern border. At exactly 8:17 in the morning, the breaking news violently hit the Bloomberg terminals. Algorithmic trading bots instantly initiated massive global sell-offs of the Canadian dollar. By 8:30 in the morning, the daytime anchors on major networks from CNN to Fox News were uniformly declaring a massive, undeniable American political victory. They loudly praised the administration for its aggressive America First negotiation tactics. They meticulously analyzed the expected downstream financial impact on imported aluminum and steel. They proudly celebrated the decisive protection of American blue-collar manufacturing jobs. While Washington vibrated with loud press conferences, fiery social media posts, and aggressive political rhetoric, Ottawa reacted with something far more calculating and significantly more terrifying: total, absolute silence. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did not immediately rush to a press briefing room to issue threats. The Canadian government did not frantically draft retaliatory tariffs on American technology or exported automobiles. The psychological contrast between the two capitals is incredibly stark. President Trump instinctively operates through the loud, brute force of executive decrees, attempting to forcefully bend deeply entrenched global supply chains through the sheer willpower of sudden financial penalties. Prime Minister Trudeau, sitting quietly in his Ottawa office, deeply understands that he does not need to sign a reactive piece of paper to win this standoff. Canada already holds the physical, tangible, unyielding reality of the earth itself. The American administration is aggressively playing political checkers with international tax codes. The Canadian administration is quietly holding a total monopoly on biological survival. You must look past the carefully curated press releases to understand what truly happened in the shadows during the critical 48 hours immediately following the White House announcement. While the American public was entirely distracted by partisan arguments over the future retail price of imported pickup trucks, the secure phone lines inside the United States Department of Agriculture began ringing relentlessly. Elite agricultural lobbyists representing multi-billion-dollar farming conglomerates from states like Iowa, Nebraska, and North Dakota completely bypassed standard public relations channels. They demanded immediate direct access to the West Wing. These powerful corporate insiders were not calling to offer their congratulations on a tough international trade stance. They were calling in a state of absolute unvarnished panic. These agricultural executives understood the catastrophic, irreversible math that the television pundits completely ignored. They knew that millions of acres of American soil were already deeply depleted of vital natural nutrients following the massive 2025 harvest. They knew that human engineering cannot instantly build a factory to artificially manufacture a geological mineral that takes millions of years to naturally form deep underground. They knew that triggering an uncalculated trade war with the single largest global supplier of critical crop nutrients is tantamount to national economic suicide. The frantic, classified messages delivered to the administration were unified, stark, and utterly desperate. A single one-page executive order designed to protect industrial metals was effectively being traded for millions of acres of starving, barren American farmland. Domestic producers operating out of places like Carlsbad, New Mexico, have been quietly struggling with degrading mineral quality for several consecutive years. They cannot rapidly scale up emergency production to save the critical 2026 growing season. The stark realization paralyzed the agricultural sector. The protectionist tariffs meant to shield the American economy had just locked American farmers inside a rapidly burning building with absolutely no available exits. The aggressive weaponization of international trade had violently backfired before the presidential signature on the executive order was even completely dry. Washington miscalculated everything. Politicians in Washington operate under a fatal delusion. They genuinely believe that signed executive orders, complex tax codes, and aggressive television rhetoric actually control the modern world. President Donald Trump is actively operating under the strict conviction that protectionist tariffs can bend any sovereign nation to his immediate will. But raw, unforgiving nature does not care about partisan political ideology. Nature absolutely does not respect newly drawn border walls or hastily rewritten international trade agreements. To fully understand the catastrophic trap the United States has just blindly walked into, you must completely forget about the stock market for a moment. You must look straight down into the dirt. Potash is not a synthetic chemical compound that can be rapidly manufactured in a massive industrial facility in Ohio or Texas. You cannot pass a $1 trillion infrastructure bill through Congress to suddenly manifest it out of thin air. Potash is a raw, finite geological deposit. It was naturally formed hundreds of millions of years ago when ancient, massive inland seas slowly evaporated, leaving behind dense, concentrated potassium salts deeply embedded inside the crust of the earth. It represents the absolute biological requirement for commercial plant growth. It is the crucial potassium component in the essential nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium fertilizer triad. Without a massive influx of potash, root systems completely fail to develop. Crops cannot resist seasonal drought or disease, and agricultural yields across the entire American Midwest completely collapse. There was a specific era when the United States proudly controlled its own agricultural destiny. During the 1930s and stretching through the heavy industrial boom of the 1950s, thriving American mining operations located in places like Carlsbad, New Mexico, and the arid deserts of Utah successfully supplied a robust, completely independent domestic agricultural sector. But geology is brutally unforgiving. After decades of relentless, aggressive industrial extraction, those American subterranean reserves are now drastically depleted. The physical ore currently coming out of the ground in New Mexico today is significantly lower in quality than it was 50 years ago. The domestic American mining infrastructure is aging, structurally exhausted, and fundamentally incapable of any rapid, meaningful expansion. While the American mineral deposits slowly dried up, the Canadian province of Saskatchewan was quietly sitting on top of the largest, highest quality, most accessible potash reserves on the entire planet. Canada currently holds 1.1 billion metric tons of verified potash reserves safely underground. That geographical jackpot is 5 times larger than the remaining dwindling American reserves. Canada effectively operates massive, highly advanced subterranean mining complexes that continuously produce roughly 32% of the total global potash supply. The Canadian government did not achieve this total continental monopoly through unfair international trade practices. They did not achieve it through currency manipulation. They achieved it through the absolute, undeniable lottery of geographic destiny. The brutal mathematical reality dictating this geopolitical hostage situation is absolutely staggering to comprehend. In the year 2023, the entire United States produced a meager 400,000 metric tons of potash domestically. During that exact same year, domestic American agricultural consumption of that specific mineral was approximately 5.3 million metric tons. That massive deficit represents a critical supply gap of more than 13 times domestic production. American farmers are desperately burning through vital fertilizer at a staggering rate that the domestic mining industry cannot even remotely begin to sustain on its own. The political operatives currently advising President Donald Trump assume that the American industrial machine will simply step up and instantly fill the massive supply void. They strongly believe the free market will magically build brand new mines if Canadian imports suddenly become too expensive due to heavy border tariffs. That specific assumption is fatally flawed. Developing a brand new potash mine from absolute scratch is not a simple bureaucratic task. You have to physically sink massive vertical shafts thousands of feet straight down through volatile, active underground water aquifers just to reach the raw ore. The timeline to accomplish this is not measured in weeks. It is not measured in months. It is measured in grueling, financially exhausting years. Even if the United States government injected billions of dollars into domestic mining tomorrow morning, the first usable commercial ton of new domestic potash would not reach a desperate farm in Iowa until the late 2020s or possibly the early 2030s. It is completely useless for the impending 2026 planting season. The profound, inescapable irony of this entire trade standoff is officially documented by the United States government itself. In November of 2025, the United States formally added potash to its official, highly restricted critical minerals list. By taking that specific action, Washington explicitly defined this precise fertilizer ingredient as strategically essential to national survival. They openly admitted to the world that the country simply cannot feed itself without it. The United States just declared a massive economic war on its own biological lifeblood. The core philosophy of aggressive economic protectionism relies entirely on a single, fundamentally flawed assumption that the target of your tariffs actually needs your market more than you need their resources. In the immediate aftermath of the White House announcement, political commentators loudly celebrated the financial leverage the United States supposedly held over Canadian automotive manufacturing and aluminum exports. They completely missed the devastating boomerang effect quietly accelerating in the background. By aggressively weaponizing cross-border trade, the United States government did not secure American economic dominance. Instead, they inexplicably handed the Canadian government a loaded economic weapon pointed directly at the heart of the American agricultural system. Ottawa does not need to engage in a loud, messy public trade war to completely devastate the American economy. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau does not need to formally announce reciprocal tariffs or aggressive financial penalties. The true terror of this situation is how effortlessly Canada can execute a crippling retaliation without ever firing a political shot. The Canadian government only needs to quietly cite domestic supply chain reviews, or temporarily pause export licenses for strategic reassessment, or simply prioritize other international buyers for their potash reserves. They can completely suffocate American farming through administrative silence. The moment Canadian potash shipments slow down at the border, the American agricultural engine begins to fatally seize up. When confronted with this terrifying reality, political surrogates in Washington immediately attempted to deflect the panic. They confidently told the American public that the free market would simply adapt. They claimed the United States would easily source potash from other international partners. This is a dangerous, mathematically impossible fantasy. Let us brutally examine the receipts and dismantle these alternative solutions. Russia currently supplies approximately 11% of American potash imports. Belarus provides roughly 4%. However, both of these nations are deeply entangled in massive geopolitical conflicts and severe Western economic sanctions. American farmers cannot reliably depend on supply chains that run directly through active war zones and hostile foreign capitals. Israel supplies an incredibly minor 3%, but they simply do not possess the physical mining infrastructure or the production capacity to rapidly scale up and replace the massive volume Canada currently provides. You can combine every single alternative global supplier on the entire planet, and they still do not come remotely close to replacing the staggering 85% market share currently controlled by Saskatchewan. The smart money on Wall Street instantly recognized this catastrophic miscalculation. While the political class celebrated, the agricultural sector descended into sheer panic. The Fertilizer Institute, representing the massive corporations that actually keep American soil alive, issued urgent, terrifying warnings about immediate structural supply shortages. But the most damning receipt of all came directly from inside the Republican Party itself. Senator Chuck Grassley, representing the massive agricultural powerhouse state of Iowa, completely abandoned partisan loyalty to publicly sound the alarm. He actively advocated for immediate specific potash exemptions from the newly implemented tariffs. This was not a minor political disagreement. This was a sitting senator from farm country staring directly at a catastrophic worst-case scenario and desperately begging the administration to realize that potash absolutely cannot be treated like imported steel or foreign automobiles. The United States attempted to swing a heavy tariff hammer to force Canadian submission. Instead, that hammer swung violently backward, completely smashing the fragile foundation of American food security. The protectionist ideology actively created the exact national security crisis it claimed to prevent. You might assume this geopolitical standoff in Washington has absolutely nothing to do with your daily life. You turn off the evening television news, check your personal bank account, and believe the volatile international trade wars will only affect billionaire hedge fund managers or elite political operatives. That is the exact psychological blind spot the mainstream media is actively counting on. This is no longer a distant macroeconomic debate happening inside a sterile government building. This crisis is currently walking straight through your front door and aggressively targeting your personal financial survival. We are officially operating on a merciless, unbreakable biological countdown. There are exactly 7 months left before the massive 2026 spring planting season begins. Across the vast agricultural heartland of the United States, the soil is completely exhausted. The massive 2025 autumn harvest aggressively stripped the ground of its vital potassium nutrients. The dirt is essentially starving. If American farmers cannot secure massive, affordable shipments of Canadian potash to replenish that soil before the heavy tractors roll out next spring, the yield consequences will be absolutely devastating. We must examine the brutal financial math that directly impacts your personal wallet. Commercial fertilizer does not represent a minor incidental expense for an American farmer operating in states like Nebraska or Illinois. It dictates roughly 30 to 45% of their total annual operating costs, depending on the specific crop. When the federal government recklessly imposes sweeping tariffs on the exact nation supplying 85% of that crucial fertilizer, the domestic price of potash instantly skyrockets. However, an American farmer growing corn or wheat cannot simply pass those massive new costs directly onto a consumer. Agricultural commodities are traded on global exchanges at strict market prices that individual growers absolutely do not control. When fertilizer costs violently spike, the agricultural producers must absorb that massive financial blow directly. They are forced to desperately ration whatever expensive potash they can actually afford to purchase, deliberately applying less nutrient to the soil. The planted crops subsequently yield significantly less physical volume. The local agricultural banks panic and immediately call in the massive farm loans. Multi-generational family farms are rapidly forced into brutal, irreversible bankruptcies. This is the exact moment the macroeconomic policy brutally hits your personal reality. When the domestic American grain supply violently contracts, the entire national food supply chain immediately fractures. The grain feed required for domestic cattle and poultry becomes prohibitively expensive. You will walk into your local grocery store and stare in absolute shock at the retail price of basic ground beef, a simple loaf of wheat bread, or a standard gallon of milk. The inflation will not be subtle. It will be completely overwhelming. Your retirement portfolio violently shrinks as major agricultural sectors collapse. Your weekly cost of living aggressively skyrockets. Your basic sense of financial security completely disappears. The protectionist trade war was aggressively sold to the American public as a protective shield. It is actually a financial guillotine. The geopolitical clock is violently ticking down. Over the next 3 months, this catastrophic standoff will inevitably resolve through one of 3 specific scenarios. Scenario 1, the silent retreat. President Donald Trump and his administration quietly realize the devastating mathematical reality. In the dead of night, Washington officially places Canadian potash on a strict tariff exemption list. They avoid a public media defeat while quietly saving the American agricultural sector from total collapse. Scenario 2, The nuclear option. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau aggressively retaliates. The Canadian government officially implements strict export quotas on all domestic potash shipments. American farmers receive absolutely nothing for the 2026 planting season. Crop yields violently collapse across the Midwest. The American public faces unprecedented, historic food inflation before the end of the year. Scenario 3, the slow bleeding. The slow. This is the most highly probable outcome. The punishing tariffs permanently remain in place. The cost of fertilizer aggressively skyrockets. Multi-generational family farms across states like Iowa and Nebraska slowly go completely bankrupt. Massive Wall Street corporations quietly purchase the foreclosed farmland at a severe discount. The American food supply survives, but the independent American farmer goes completely extinct. The obsession with economic protectionism fundamentally misunderstands the modern interconnected world. You cannot forcefully isolate a nation using heavy border taxes without completely strangling the vital supply lines that keep your own citizens alive. The aggressive weaponization of international trade was specifically designed to make the United States economically invincible. Instead, it exposed the ultimate, undeniable vulnerability of the nation. The government tried to protect American wealth, but they carelessly handed the keys to American survival directly to Ottawa. The raw dirt always wins.